There's a specific kind of morning some people have. They wake up, and before their feet touch the floor, their mind is already running scenarios. The meeting that could go badly, the message they haven't received yet, the thing that felt good yesterday but might unravel today. It's not dramatic, it's quiet, just a low hum of tension that starts before the day does. Someone else might call this pessimism or overthinking, but that's not quite right, because the person living with it isn't trying to be negative. They're trying to be ready. They're running safety checks before anything has even happened. And here's what most people miss. This isn't a personality flaw. It's not even really about being negative. This is conditioning. And once you see where it starts, everything makes sense. How expecting failure really starts. To understand why some people always brace for impact, you have to look at how the brain learns danger. The human brain is built to keep you alive. That's its first job. Not to make you happy, not to make you confident, just to keep you breathing. And to do that, it has to predict what's coming. It scans the environment constantly, looking for anything that might go wrong. For most people, this system runs in the background. It only fires when there's actual danger. But for some, it never really turns off. Here's why. The brain doesn't distinguish between physical threat and emotional threat. A harsh word in childhood, an unpredictable home, a moment where trust collapsed. These register the same way a predator would. The nervous system logs them as danger, and once danger is logged enough times, the brain starts assuming it's everywhere. So it begins predicting problems before they appear. Not because it's broken, but because it's doing exactly what it was trained to do. Expect impact. Stay ready. Don't be caught off guard again. And when you're a child, this works. It keeps you alert in an environment that required alertness. But the brain doesn't automatically turn this off when the environment changes. The threat detector keeps running even when the threat is gone. From there, the mind builds habits, quiet, automatic habits that feel like personality, but are really just old wiring still firing. Why some minds default to, what if it goes wrong? This is where overthinking quietly takes over daily life. Picture someone lying in bed at night. Tomorrow, they have something good planned, a lunch with a friend, a project they're excited about, maybe even a small celebration. But instead of feeling anticipation, their mind starts listing the ways it could fall apart. What if the friend cancels? What if the project fails? What if they say the wrong thing, or someone gets upset, or the whole thing just feels awkward and they can't leave? It's not one thought, it's a cascade. And by the time they fall asleep, the good thing doesn't feel good anymore. It feels risky. This is anticipatory anxiety, the brain trying to prepare for disappointment before disappointment even has a chance to happen. And the strange part is, it feels like protection. Like if you imagine the worst outcome, you won't be blindsided by it. You'll be ready. But ready for what? The disaster hasn't happened. It might not happen. And yet the body is already tense, already guarding, already living in the aftermath of something that only exists in projection. Some people wake up this way every single day. The mental scanning starts before they're even fully conscious. What needs to be managed today? What could go wrong? What small thing might spiral? And once this pattern sets in, it starts repeating everywhere. In work, in relationships, in moments that should feel neutral. The brain stops distinguishing between real danger and possible danger. It treats them the same. The expectation patterns. These thoughts don't appear at random. They follow clear, repeatable patterns. Once you know what to look for, you start seeing them everywhere. Not because they're rare, but because they're so automatic that most people don't even realize they're doing them. Let's walk through them. The pre-failure scan. This is the mental checklist that runs before anything begins, before a conversation, before a task, before even a good day. The brain runs through everything that could go wrong and assigns each possibility a level of threat. It shows up as a low-level dread that has no clear source. You're about to do something simple, send an email, make a phone call, and suddenly you're running simulations. What if they misunderstand? What if this causes a problem? What if there's a consequence you didn't predict? The psychology here is called defensive pessimism. The brain believes that imagining failure prevents failure, that by mentally rehearsing disaster, you're somehow preparing for it. But preparation would mean creating a plan. This is just rehearsing dread. The backup obsession. Some people can't commit to one plan. They need a backup plan, and a backup for the backup, and sometimes even a backup for that. It sounds practical, but it's not about logistics. It's about the belief that the first thing will fail, the second thing will fail, and if you don't have a third thing, you'll be stranded. This stems from a lack of trust in stability. At some point, something important fell through and the brain logged it as nothing holds. So now even when plans are solid, the mind insists on redundancy, not because it's useful, but because it feels safer than trust. The emotional bracing, this one is quieter. It doesn't show up in behavior as much as it does in internal posture. Before anything potentially good happens, the person tenses, not physically necessarily, emotionally. They pull back just a little. They don't let themselves feel the fullness of excitement or hope, because if they do and it doesn't work out, the disappointment will hit harder. So they brace. They keep hope at arm's length. They let themselves feel 60% of the joy just in case, and they think this is protecting them. But what it's really doing is making good moments feel muted before they even arrive. This comes from something called emotional memory bias. The brain remembers pain more vividly than pleasure. So when faced with something that could go either way, it defaults to the memory of past letdowns, not past wins. The control illusion. Here's the subtle one. The belief that if you worry enough, you can prevent the bad thing from happening. It sounds irrational when you say it out loud, but internally it doesn't feel irrational. It feels like vigilance. Like if you stop watching, something will slip through. If you stop preparing, you'll be caught off guard. If you relax, the universe will punish you for it. This is a cognitive distortion rooted in childhood patterns. If you grew up in an environment where you had to stay hyper-aware to stay safe, emotionally or otherwise, your brain learned that vigilance equals survival. And now, even when there's nothing to be vigilant about, the system stays on. The mind doesn't ask, "Is there a threat?" It assumes there is and scans to find it. The silent catastrophe builder. This is the one that happens entirely in private. No one else sees it. Sometimes the person themselves doesn't even notice it until it's fully formed. Something small happens, a delayed response to a text, a meeting that got rescheduled, a friend who seemed distracted, and instead of taking it at face value, the mind starts building. They're upset with me. I did something wrong. This is the beginning of them pulling away. Soon, everything will fall apart. Within minutes, a neutral event has become a full narrative of loss, and the person is now emotionally living in that story, even though none of it has happened, even though there's no evidence. This is catastrophic thinking, driven by a nervous system that's stuck in threat mode. The brain isn't analyzing what's likely, it's protecting against what's painful. And the fastest way to protect against pain is to see it coming from a mile away. The "I knew it" reflex. And then, when something does go wrong, even something small, there's this moment of grim validation. I knew it. It doesn't feel like satisfaction. It feels like proof that the worry was justified, that the hypervigilance was necessary, that the bracing was smart. But here's the hidden part. The brain remembers every time it predicted disaster and disaster came. It conveniently forgets every time it predicted disaster and nothing happened. So the pattern gets reinforced not by accuracy, but by selective memory. And this is how the loop closes. The mind expects failure, finds examples of failure, even minor ones, and concludes that expecting failure is the only rational response. Together, these patterns create a very specific mental environment, one where rest feels risky and vigilance feels like survival. The psychology behind expecting the worst. At this point, it stops being about personality. This is neurobiology. This is how the brain responds when it's been taught that the world isn't safe, even when the lesson was subtle, even when no one meant to teach it. Anticipatory anxiety isn't a mood, it's a state. The nervous system is locked in a pattern where it's constantly preparing for threat, even in neutral moments. And because the brain's threat detection system is faster than its reasoning system, it doesn't wait for evidence. It just reacts. Here's what that means in practice. The part of your brain that scans for danger, the amygdala, fires before the part that evaluates whether the danger is real, the prefrontal cortex. So by the time you're consciously thinking about a situation, your body has already decided it's a threat. Your heart rate has already shifted. Your muscles have already tensed. And once your body believes there's danger, your thoughts follow. You start finding reasons to justify the fear. You start building cases for why the worry is reasonable. Not because you're irrational, But because your brain is trying to make sense of the signals your body is already sending. This is learned. It's learned through repeated exposure to unpredictability, criticism, loss, or environments where emotional safety wasn't guaranteed. And once learned, it becomes automatic. The brain doesn't sit down and decide, I'm going to expect the worst today. It just does, because that's the pathway that's been carved in. That's the route the signals take. And every time the brain runs that route, the pathway gets a little deeper, a little faster, a little harder to redirect. But here's the important part. The brain prefers false alarms over missed danger. Evolutionarily, that's the safer bet. If you think there's a predator and there isn't, you wasted energy. If you think there's no predator and there is, you die. So the system is biased toward overreaction. For some people, that bias becomes their baseline, and habits feel permanent until they're understood. Once you see them as wiring, not character, the whole thing starts to shift. What they're really asking for, from the outside, it looks like negativity. Someone who always sees the downside, who can't just enjoy things, who finds problems where others see ease. And it's easy to get frustrated with that, to feel like they're draining the room or pulling focus or making everything harder than it needs to be. But that's not what's happening inside. Inside, the constant scanning is a request, a quiet, desperate request for safety, for proof that this time it's going to be okay. That this time the thing they're worried about won't happen, that someone will notice they're holding everything together and tell them they can stop. When someone asks, but what if it doesn't work out? They're not trying to sabotage. They're asking, can you help me believe this is safe? When someone triple checks details or needs repeated reassurance or keeps circling back to the same concern, they're not being difficult. They're trying to quiet a nervous system that won't stop signaling danger. The problem is most people don't hear it that way. They hear it as doubt, as distrust, as an inability to just relax and trust the process. And so they respond with frustration or dismissiveness or the kind of reassurance that doesn't land because it doesn't match the depth of the fear. And that's when the gap widens. The person expecting disaster feels more alone, more misunderstood, more certain that they have to handle this vigilance on their own because no one else gets it. But the intent is protection, not control. It's a bid for co-regulation, for someone else to hold some of the weight so they don't have to carry all of it. Why hope feels risky to them. This is why even simple optimism can feel risky to them. When someone says, it's going to work out, or don't worry, it'll be fine, the brain doesn't register that as comfort. It registers it as exposure, as a setup for disappointment. Because here's what happened before. They hoped, and it didn't work out. They let themselves believe something good was coming, and then it didn't. And the crash from hope to reality felt worse than if they'd never hoped at all. So the brain makes a calculation. If hoping leads to pain, and not hoping leads to numbness, numbness is safer. At least then you're not falling from a height. This is why small wins don't feel real yet. Why even when things go right, there's this lingering sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. The brain hasn't integrated the win as evidence. It's holding it at a distance, scanning for the catch. Emotional trust lags behind reality. Even when life becomes objectively safer, the nervous system takes time to catch up. It doesn't update instantly just because circumstances changed. It needs repeated proof, consistent proof, proof that isn't contradicted by new danger. And until that proof accumulates, hope feels like a trap. The brain doesn't reject hope, it delays it. It puts it in quarantine until there's enough evidence that it won't hurt to believe. The false sense of preparedness. Worry feels productive. That's the trap. When you're lying awake at 2 a.m. running through scenarios, it doesn't feel like wasted time. It feels like you're working on the problem, like you're getting ahead of it. Like if you just think through every angle, you'll find the solution that prevents disaster. But here's what actually happens. The problem doesn't get solved. The scenarios just multiply. And the more you think about them, the more real they feel. What started as "what if this goes wrong" becomes "this is definitely going wrong, I can feel it." This is how preparation turns into paralysis. The mind gets so tangled in possible outcomes that it can't move forward with any of them. Every option feels risky. Every path has a trapdoor. So the safest choice becomes doing nothing, waiting, watching, staying in the mental rehearsal stage indefinitely. And the cruel irony is that outcomes rarely improve. All the worrying, all the mental preparation, all the vigilance, it doesn't actually change what happens. It just changes how exhausted you are when it does. The mind feels ready. Life stays paused, because readiness isn't the same as action. And simulating disaster isn't the same as preventing it. But when you're inside the loop, it's hard to see the difference. How this shows up in relationships. Eventually, this inner tension spills outward. It's subtle at first. Maybe you overanalyze a text that took too long to arrive. Maybe you read into tone that wasn't there. Maybe you start predicting conflict before conflict has even started, and then brace for it in ways that actually create distance. Someone says, "I'm fine," and your brain doesn't believe them. It scans their face, their posture, their word choice, looking for signs of what they're not saying. And sometimes they really are fine. But you're already 3 steps ahead, preparing for the moment when they're not. This is hypervigilance moving from internal to social. The same mechanism that scans for danger in situations starts scanning for danger in people. And the problem is people feel that. They might not know what it is, but they feel the weight of being monitored, of being read, of never being taken at face value. It's exhausting to be around, not because the person is malicious, but because the energy is intense. There's no lightness. Every interaction carries the potential for rupture, and that potential is always quietly being accounted for. Friendships start to feel like maintenance. Relationships feel like risk management. And small moments that should be easy a casual lunch, a phone call, a shared silence, become loaded with unspoken tension. And most people don't know what they're reacting to. They just feel the weight. They pull back without meaning to. They create distance, not because they want to, but because proximity feels like drowning. Why positivity backfires. This is why reassurance often makes things worse. When someone is deep in anticipatory anxiety and you tell them, "Don't worry," what they hear is, "You're wrong to feel this." Or worse, "You're overreacting." And maybe they are overreacting, but telling them that doesn't turn off the alarm. It just adds shame to the fear. Now they're anxious and ashamed of being anxious, which only tightens the spiral. Optimism in these moments can feel like a dismissal, like the person offering it doesn't understand the stakes, like they're standing in the sun, telling someone in the dark to just look at the light. The brain hears risk where others hear comfort, because the brain isn't processing the words logically. It's processing them through a filter of threat. And anything that minimizes the threat feels like it's minimizing the person's ability to assess reality. What they need isn't positivity, it's acknowledgement. Someone to say, "I see that you're worried. That makes sense given what your brain is telling you." Not agreement that disaster is coming, just recognition that the fear is real, even if the disaster isn't. From there, the nervous system can start to settle, not because someone fixed it, but because someone saw it without judgment. What actually helps them? So what actually works? Not motivational speeches, not forced optimism, not telling them to just relax or think positive or stop worrying so much. What helps is much quieter. It starts with acknowledging the risk without feeding it, not denying that something could go wrong, but also not inflating it, just naming it plainly. Yes, that could happen, and if it does, we'll figure it out. That simple shift from avoiding disaster to quietly planning for it takes the charge out. It stops being this looming, catastrophic thing and becomes something manageable, not gone, but smaller. Then focus shifts to the controllables. Not everything that could happen, but the few things that can actually be influenced. The small actions that reduce uncertainty without requiring a mental overhaul. Consistency matters more than intensity. The nervous system doesn't trust grand gestures. It trusts patterns. Repeated evidence that things are stable, that people show up, that the small promises get kept. This is how safety gets rebuilt, one boring, reliable interaction at a time. And predictability is underrated. When someone knows what to expect, their brain doesn't have to stay in scanning mode. It can relax just a little, because predictability means fewer variables, and fewer variables mean fewer things to prepare for. None of this is flashy. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough, but it works because it speaks to the part of the brain that's been running the show. The part that just needs proof. That vigilance can be dialed down without everything falling apart. The fix is smaller than people think. Change doesn't come from mindset flips. It doesn't come from deciding one day to just stop worrying, or from a single realization that suddenly rewires everything. That's not how the nervous system works. The nervous system learns through repetition, through small, repeated exposures to safety that don't get contradicted by danger, through moments where the thing you feared didn't happen and your brain had to log that as data. One safe moment doesn't do it. 10 safe moments barely register. But 100 safe moments, that starts to shift the baseline. This is why motivation doesn't hold. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings fluctuate. But behavior that repeats, even when you don't feel like it, that's what carves new pathways. That's what teaches the brain that a different response is possible. It's not about believing things will go right. It's about acting as though they might and letting the evidence accumulate slowly. And here's the part most people don't realize. Proof rewires faster than promises. Your brain doesn't care what you tell it. It cares what it experiences. So the fastest way to change the expectation of disaster is to create small, lived experiences of stability over and over, until the new pattern becomes the default. Expecting the worst is learned. It's not wired into your DNA. It's not a fixed trait. It's not who you are at your core. It's a survival response that got trained in and then stayed active long after it was needed. And the moment you see it as learned, you also see that it can be unlearned, not erased, not bypassed, but gently, gradually retrained. Awareness alone reduces fear, not because awareness solves the problem, but because it takes the mystery out of it. When you understand why your brain does this, it stops feeling like a character flaw and starts feeling like an outdated security system that just needs recalibration. And safety retrains the mind over time, not through effort, not through force, just through quiet, consistent proof that the threats your brain is scanning for aren't actually there. The shift doesn't feel dramatic. There's no single moment where everything changes. It's more like this. One day you notice you didn't spiral the way you used to, or you had a good moment and didn't immediately brace for it to end. Or you trusted something just a little and it held. And then that happens again and again until the new response becomes as automatic as the old one. You don't need to stop thinking. You don't need to force yourself into optimism or pretend the worry isn't there. You just need your brain to feel safe enough to rest. And that happens slower than you want, but faster than you think. One small moment of stability at a time.